The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the dusty desert road. A lone woman, Claire Matthews, drove her old Jeep through the desolate terrain, her faithful German shepherd, Max, riding shotgun. Max wasn't an ordinary dog. His steely gaze and scarred muzzle told stories of his past. He was a retired war dog, a veteran of missions too classified to recount. Claire had rescued Max 2 years ago from a shelter after his service ended. Though his days of combat were over, his instincts were sharp as ever. Claire loved the solitude of the open desert, but she also knew the dangers that lurked in its vast emptiness. And today, the air felt unusually heavy. As she approached a remote stretch of road, a black van suddenly screeched to a halt in front of her. 4 masked men jumped out, armed and aggressive. Claire slammed on the brakes, her heart pounding. Max growled low, his body tense. "Step out of the car." One of the men barked, pointing a gun at her. Claire's mind raced, but she complied, her hands trembling. Max let out a warning bark, his hackles raised. "Leave the dog," another man ordered as he yanked Claire out of the driver's seat. But Max wasn't one to back down. He lunged at the nearest assailant, teeth bared. The man stumbled, but another struck Max with the butt of his rifle. Max yelped and fell back, momentarily stunned. Before Claire could react, the men shoved her into the van and sped off, leaving Max dazed and alone by the roadside. The van disappeared into the horizon, but Max, despite his injury, pulled himself up. His sharp eyes locked onto the tire tracks left in the dirt. The dog's military training kicked in. He would find Claire, no matter what it took. Max sniffed the ground, catching the faint scent of Claire mixed with the acrid stench of the kidnappers. Every muscle in his body was taut with determination. He moved swiftly but cautiously, his senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through him. The trail led him to a small, dilapidated cabin hidden deep within the desert. Inside, Claire sat tied to a chair, her mind racing with escape plans. The kidnappers were arguing among themselves in the next room. They had taken her, believing she was the heiress to a fortune. Little did they know, they had made a grave mistake. Outside, Max circled the cabin, assessing the situation. His training had taught him patience and precision. He spotted an open window and silently leapt through it, landing in a shadowed corner. His ears twitched, picking up the muffled voices of the kidnappers. "We'll keep her here until the ransom is paid," one of them growled. Max's eyes narrowed. He crept through the cabin, avoiding creaky floorboards, until he reached Claire. She gasped softly in relief when she saw him, her eyes welling up. Max nudged her hand, his warm nose reassuring her that help had arrived. With her hands tied, she couldn't free herself, but Max had been trained for situations like this. He gently bit the ropes binding her wrists and began to chew through them. Claire's heart pounded as she watched the doorway, praying the men wouldn't walk in. Just as Max freed her, a loud crash came from the other room. The kidnappers had overturned a table in their heated argument. Claire whispered, "Let's go, boy," and Max led her toward the window. But as they climbed out, one of the men spotted them. "Hey! She's escaping!" he shouted. Max barked fiercely and charged at the man, his powerful body slamming into him. The man fell back, stunned, as Claire and Max bolted into the night. The kidnappers scrambled after them, but Max's knowledge of the terrain and his unrelenting loyalty gave Claire a fighting chance. They disappeared into the desert shadows, but this was far from over. Max was no longer just a loyal companion, he was a soldier back on a mission. And these outlaws had no idea what they were up against. The night air was cool, but tension burned hot in Claire's chest as she followed Max through the labyrinth of desert dunes. Behind them, the kidnappers' shouts grew faint, but Claire knew they wouldn't give up so easily. Max paused to sniff the air, his keen nose identifying threats before they could come close. "Which way, boy?" Claire whispered, trusting Max's instincts. The dog turned sharply to the right, leading her toward a rocky outcrop. The terrain became rougher, forcing Claire to climb and crawl. Max stayed by her side, alert for any signs of danger. By dawn, they had reached a hidden canyon that Max seemed to recognize. Claire sank to the ground, exhausted. "We need a plan," she muttered, stroking Max's fur. Her words were cut short by the distant hum of engines. The kidnappers were closing in. Max's ears perked up. He led Claire to a narrow crevice in the canyon wall, motioning for her to hide. The space was tight, but it offered cover. As the kidnappers approached, Max slipped away, his agile form disappearing into the shadows. Max moved like a ghost, circling behind the kidnappers as they fanned out in search of Claire. He waited for the perfect moment, then struck. One man yelped as Max leapt at him, knocking him to the ground. The commotion drew the others, but Max had already vanished into the rocks. The kidnappers began to panic. "Where's the dog?" one of them shouted, his voice tinged with fear. Max was more than just a dog, he was a trained operative. He picked them off one by one, using his speed and stealth to disarm and disorient them. Meanwhile, Claire watched from her hiding spot, her heart swelling with both fear and admiration. Max was holding his own, but she knew she couldn't leave him to face the danger alone. As the sun climbed higher, Claire and Max found an unexpected ally in a lone traveler who had heard the commotion. Armed and experienced in desert survival, the traveler introduced himself as Jake, a former ranger. Together, the three devised a plan to take down the kidnappers and ensure Claire's safety. With Jake's help, Claire and Max set a trap for the remaining kidnappers. Using the terrain to their advantage, they led the outlaws into a narrow canyon and ambushed them. Max played a crucial role, taking down the leader with a well-timed attack. By the end of the battle, the kidnappers were subdued, and Claire was safe. The authorities arrived, taking the kidnappers into custody. Claire thanked Jake for his help and promised to stay in touch. Max, though battered and tired, wagged his tail as Claire hugged him tightly. They had survived the ordeal, but their bond had grown even stronger. Claire and Max returned home, the familiar comforts of their small house welcoming them back. Max's injuries healed quickly, and life returned to normal. But every so often, Claire would catch Max staring out the window, his ears twitching as if waiting for the next adventure. She smiled, knowing that together, they could face anything the world threw at them. With Jake's help, Claire and Max set a trap for the remaining kidnappers. Using the terrain to their advantage, they led the outlaws into a narrow canyon and ambushed them. Max played a crucial role, taking down the leader with a well-timed attack. By the end of the battle, the kidnappers were subdued, and Claire was safe. The authorities arrived, taking the kidnappers into custody. Claire thanked Jake for his help and promised to stay in touch. Max, though battered and tired, wagged his tail as Claire hugged him tightly. They had survived the ordeal, but their bond had grown even stronger. Claire and Max returned home, the familiar comforts of their small house welcoming them back. Max's injuries healed quickly, and life returned to normal. But every so often, Claire would catch Max staring out the window, his ears twitching as if waiting for the next adventure. She smiled, knowing that together, they could face anything the world threw at them.